it's really hard to center ourselves sometimes when we feel uncomfortable or maybe someone's making a request of us where we feel like, well, it's the farm that's asking us for our time and the farm comes first and sort of all these expectations, maybe the culture of the farm, and it can be really hard to say no. I think that it's interesting the way that we articulate our boundaries in such an unhealthy way. And so to stay grounded and to center yourself and to stay calm, it's it's tricky, but we have to learn some of those grounding exercises of how we stay together as a couple. Um, when we are thinking about our role. So it's almost like our individual roles and then like our role as a couple, how we can stay together, how we can ensure that we are also building our own family schedule, values.
Welcome to the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Fraze, Farm Family Coach, here with another episode full of transition tips, tactics, and sometimes hard truths to get harmony on your farm. Hey there, folks. Welcome to episode 37 of the Farm Family Harmony podcast. And today it's a great day to talk to one of our coaching team, Kalynn Spain. And Kalynn is got a lot of practice and education in conflict resolution. And she's got some really good lived experience about moving to a farm recently where her in-laws also live. So I'm pretty sure that many of you are going to really connect to what Kalynn has to share today. And Kalynn, just give us an update of where you've been and what's happening in your life since we last talked on the podcast.
Mhm. Actually, I went back and I listened to, the first episode, and that was when we were living near Carmen, where we were for 6 years, and but yeah, since then, we've moved to the farm. This is my husband's family farm, so he is going to be if we do have successful, succession conversations, then, he'll be the 4th generation, and hopefully our kids can maybe take over one day, and yeah, so we're in the thick of the succession planning conversations in terms of, showing his parents that we are committed to being here, but also, um, as we're gonna talk about today, setting some healthy boundaries around our time because we do rely on off-farm income right now for cash flow, so yeah, but we're here and living, just like it's about an hour and a half north of Winnipeg, for those who are not familiar with Arborg.
Right. And so lots of transition for you, and you have two little kiddos.
Mhm.
You're also raising there as well. And we've entitled today's podcast Healthy Boundaries and How to Say No Authentically. And I just want to give a shout out to Taylor, who might be listening from North Dakota, who recently reached out to me and she said, Kalynn, whenever I get really frustrated, I just like to turn on your podcast, Elaine, and listen to your voice because I find it calming. So we just like everybody to calm down today. It's when this airs, it will be February. And prior to Valentine's Day, and there's all kinds of expectations around all kinds of celebrations. So, first of all, boundaries, Kalynn. Some people hear that word and they go, "Oh, you're going to tell me what I can and cannot do." So, what are boundaries?
Yeah. Well, I'm raising 2 kids. They're 2 and 4. And so a lot of the podcasts, other types of podcasts that I listen to are, around raising children in a healthy way and trying to just stay grounded as a parent. And so for me, boundaries becomes around like I looked to, just one resource that she's a psychologist that talks about boundaries being, especially with children, being something that we do. It's not about, this demand that we're making on our kids of saying, like, get off the couch, or if you don't do this, like a threat or something like that. It's really about using our own, like centering ourselves and using our own control and our own sense of, authority as a parent And I think this can apply in adult relationships as well, right? Because it's really hard to center ourselves sometimes when we feel uncomfortable or maybe someone's making a request of us where we feel like, well, it's the farm that's asking us for our time and the farm comes first and sort of all these expectations, maybe the culture of the farm, and it can be really hard to say no. And so which I'll talk about a little bit more, but for her, when Dr. Becky talks about this is she goes by Dr. Becky, that's not her last name, but she
No,
goes
but
by
she
Dr.
so to find her, it's the word Doctor Becky. Doc
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so she goes by Dr. Becky, that's not her last name, but she talks about a healthy boundary being something that we are going to be doing. Um, so as a sturdy leader, as a parent, something that we would do if behavior doesn't change. And so, really, what that means is that if we're still seeing behavior that's not really appropriate or kind of acceptable, that we can take some action and that the other person, the child in this case, doesn't have to necessarily do anything. So, it's not about what we're expecting the other person to do, it's what we are going to do for ourselves.
And
And
so it's a kind of self-care, right?
it is
Care of your and that's an interesting way to frame it. I'm gonna put boundaries in place for my own self-care and well-being.
for myself, and what can I do for myself? Because I think too, like, especially when we're raising small kids, like, it can feel so out of control that, emotional regulation is kind of the first strategy for so I'm practicing that all the time with small kids, but then with adults too, I mean, you can
Sure.
kind of, like, feel a little bit emotional maybe when you're like, "Oh, man, this is such a frustrating situation. I don't know what to say in this situation. I need to regulate myself. I need to figure out a way that I can healthily say no or say no in a way that feels authentic to me and feels good."
So what are your tips for doing that, to say no?
Yeah, so I think that number 1 is, something that I've talked about before as well, is just to number 1 is focus on centering yourself and really stay grounded, in yourself. So, if
Absolutely.
I mean, if emotions are running high, um, I talk about it a little bit in my article, but it's like when you think about how no comes out, right? Like, what we don't just say no, sometimes that can maybe be from feeling really resentful, and it's like somebody's yelling and they're trying to say no, but they don't know how to articulate that, so they're just like, "Why would you ask me that to do that? It's a da, da, da,"
And
it's
you know
just
what
sort of
happened raised
like, I think that it's interesting the way that we articulate our boundaries in such an unhealthy way, and so to stay grounded and to center yourself and to stay calm, it's tricky, but we have to learn some of those grounding
well,
exercises,
and
which
also your tone of voice. I think your tonality is really important too.
Mhm.
I seen my son Ian used to say, "Mom, why are you mad at me?" I said, "Ian, I'm not mad at you. I'm just speaking to you in a firm tone of voice because what I'm about to say is really important and I need you to hear me." And
Mhm.
sometimes, you know, the mama bear voice may be a little bit different tonality, and it's not because you're angry, but your intention is to be yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that there's a way to be assertive and calm, and like you said, it's like a stern it can be a confidence that is really hard to express sometimes when especially when we're working with family members, I mean
So I should
for myself, it was like as an in-law, I just felt like as soon as we moved to the farm, like my time was just sort of like assumed that I would just be helping on the farm.
let's practice that. Pretend I'm your mother-in-law. Kalynn, can you come over? I need some help with the chickens.
Well, I actually have something I need to do today.
Okay.
And I would really love to. So, I mean, using something like almost like a sandwich approach, like, when you've heard like difficult feedback, it's like,
Right.
I would really love to help you. Can I do that tomorrow? Or, this is when it's a good time
Or what works better for me would be tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
tomorrow. Yeah. Or another time that's now is not going to be a good time for me. And actually, I think we don't necessarily need to give a reason. Like, why do we need to give a specific
Well,
reason?
I think the people pleasers that are listening to this would say, "I wanna make people upset," right? And so, Caitlin, you reached out for this information and support as a mom, and also just exploring how to get better at doing this more authentically. drbecky.com, she also talks about external and internal boundaries. So, what you're thinking and feeling,
Mhm.
we have this saying in our practice, I think, I feel, I need, I want, which is a good way to sort of put a template around how you're asking for things. So, I think, mom, which is what I called my mother in law, I know that you wanna talk to me every day, but I would appreciate if you didn't call me during work hours because you're working from home, I'm working from a lot of people listening to this are working on their farms, ranches, and doing other jobs, possibly also working from the farm. How do you communicate that no authentically without giving a lot of explanation? What's some phraseology? What are some terms that you've learned to help you say no authentically?
Yeah, I think it's talking about what's important to you. So like for me, my work is really important to me and maybe it's confusing maybe for my in-laws to understand that like if I'm working from home, that means that like I'm actually not available for farm work. Um I try to just connect with them usually in the morning and so then to say, this is when I'm working and it needs to be called work and to express how important that work is for me, and also how to kind of make a plan that I'm going to be available at a later time, that we can look forward to the week ahead around when I can actually and so it gives me back some of that control of when my time is going to be given to the farm. Um, and so just, there is that nonviolent language I think that we can use with using a lot of I statements and using a lot of, um, words that would express what is actually important, what's really getting at the heart of what's important to us, which is my work that I do, why that is important to me. I talk about it. I talk about it with my in-laws around, like, the reason why I do this work and how I'm so passionate about it. Um, and so for them to see like that, acknowledge the how that it is important to me and to not be interrupted, I think it's one way to, give them some insight a little bit.
And also talking about interruption, another thing I find really helpful, even when you call someone, the thing now, because many people won't even give me their phone numbers. They want to do everything by email, which shout out to all of you millennials out here who use a phone as a phone. I really appreciate that. But that's another conversation. So you talked about interruption, but also about permission? How do you use permission? Like I would say when I call someone, is now a good time or are you in the middle of something? So inviting the other person to tell you what their boundary, what works for them and what doesn't. So how does
Well well, yeah, and I mean, we have a landline, so it's like the old school way of just calling at any point in time, and I could be on a call with someone, I could be in the middle of coaching, and it's just like, no, like, I have to really so, it's almost a form of, like, articulating what is gonna be the best way to communicate, right? And saying, like, "Just send me a text message, I may or may not get it." It's managing the expectation of the other person too to say, like, "Just so you know, just to give you a heads up, I'm booked for 4 hours today." And, like, usually Tuesdays are my coaching days, and it's like, I may not be available, I might not be like, "Don't call the house." This is actually something so or it works to send a text message or it works to so, yeah, and I think it's figuring out what works for each person. If I text my in-laws, they could be in the yard and they won't see it for a couple hours. So then I, wander to the yard and go to them in person, right? It's different for everyone. And also it's a generational thing too, right? So,
And again, you can also ask the other person, what's the best way for me to communicate with you?
yeah. Mhm.
And and so
Yeah.
so when you're a little bit shy about this, Kaylin, where do people get courage to set boundaries when they haven't been doing such a great job of that in the past?
I mean, I think I I always go back to centering. And because my sense of self is shaped by the farm and, like, what the farm may or may not expect of me, because, like, you've talked about this, Aline, the farm being a bit of a monster that's just always there, right, taking away. And I think this goes with my like how my husband also sets boundaries for us as a family on the weekend, that there's just an unspoken expectation that he's gonna be available, um, and so, like, he needs to be careful about how his time is, like, given to the farm, and then how his time is co like,
Just
and was blocked out.
your husband is the adult child of the farming parents. That's the scenario you find yourself. I was doing some background reading with Dr. Becky. She talked about, in a marriage relationship, it's really important. And Marcia Harris, who's a family therapist close to me here in Brandon, has also said the same thing. So it really resonated with me. And this is what both of these marriage therapists slash psychologists say is as a spouse, you have to feel and know that your spouse has your back.
Mm,
Oh, for
mhm.
your husband to come after his off-farm job all during the week, and then on weekends, "Oh, he's back at the farm."
Right.
Uh, grab him, and you've got a spouse and 2 kids also in the mix. How does how does that person deal with all the deep emotion, Kalyn? Because the tears come pretty quickly when you try and change a behavior that people have always, "Oh, don't worry about Elaine, just call her last because 'cause she'll always show up." I've had the same experience in my own family where I did not go to my father's 70th birthday party because they asked me last. They set it all up, and then I couldn't go because I was committed with my family to go to a wonderful concert at Spirit Fest in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota that day. And they said, "What? You're not going to come to your father's birthday?" I said, "No, because I've spent 50 hours building this beautiful book for him of photographs and memories, which I did give him as a gift for his 70th birthday." But he asked me what my family's priorities were. That was a long time ago, Galen, and I still remember how it felt, right? Because, "Oh, don't worry about it. She's the eldest. She just always takes care of things and she'll show up." Well, guess what? Dark minded by not showing up at my father's birthday party. And that was obviously I would have liked to have been there, but I'd made other plans and paid tickets and
You have a life
yeah,
of your own.
right.
Yeah.
So boundaries are for your own needs and your own protection as well, and they're farmers all know. I think when I talk about boundaries, about talking about tough as you kill, and I have a photograph of a fence, right? So we're all familiar with fences. So what are some other healthy ways to build the trust when you're trying to, fit into these expectations? Because you said, I say, where is it written that the farm comes first?
Yeah.
And a question from Brene Brown's perspective is, what are the stories you're telling yourself about boundaries? So what have you learned now that's really helping you to be authentic and saying no?
Yeah, I think it's all about, for me, being for myself, being grounded in myself and my own values, and giving my in-laws like some insight into like who I really am authentically, what's important to me, as we continue to grow together, like, as we continue to get to know each other. I mean, my husband and I have been together for 6 years, so, and then also, like, for my husband, Kyle, and I to really be on the same team and to stay, grounded together as a couple, and I talked about that before, yeah, completely united. And, yeah, we're coming up to Valentine's Day, so, you gotta think about that, how like, that teamwork piece of how we stay together as a couple, when we are thinking about our role. So it's almost like our individual roles and then like our role as a couple, how we can stay together, how we can ensure that we are also building our own family schedule, values. We're raising two small kids. It's one of those things where it's like we need to be firm as a family, and we've talked about that quite a bit actually, just like as partnership, that it's like, okay, this is how we stay strong while we then go out and then contribute to the farm. And it's like filling our cup of, what's going to help us feel authentically us, but filling our cup of energy that then we can give much more easily to the farm because our cups are full. And
Yeah.
he's working
Super.
full time, and then he comes home on Saturday morning, he's, like, on the phone. Like, it's like he's gonna burn out. So he has to learn how to juggle his energy as well, and I think too that I think that just that for him to set a boundary with, his own time on the farm, he did that when we first met, like, 6 years ago. It was like, no, he was starting to pull back and say, "No, I do need to I wanna start a family. I do wanna focus on myself now." And so that was a huge boundary just with his time, and now that we're back on the farm, it's like, how does that look and play out is he says, "Well, my family comes, comes first," essentially, is like to figure out what's important to us first as a family to help build that strong foundation. Um, yeah, and I think it's just, like, about us. I was gonna go back to Doctor Becky, but we can do that later, so, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go back to Dr. Becky, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, well, like, really what she says is, like, it's like it's just so fascinating around this concept of, like, what we will do that the other person is not expected to do anything at all. Because I just think that when often when we think about boundaries, we think about, like, well, don't do that or, like, trying to get other people to change. And I mean, his family is Ukrainian. They're really they don't like change. That's okay, not a lot of farmers do, so it's fair. And so but when we think about, like, what the changes that him and I want to make, we want to be making those changes together as a couple that's going to help us build a strong foundation, and help us show up, more authentically as ourselves on the farm when we feel like, we are together as a couple and we have a strong sense of trust as well. So,
One of the things, if you don't mind me sharing, that I think you and Kyle have done really well in your transition back to the family farm and using that as a launching point for the jobs you already have and what you see for your future, is you went to a financial planner to get very clear data, financial plan of what you needed from farm, what you needed from off farm. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's another really important conflict point, money, and now not having enough money and being very clear where that money needs to come from,
mhm,
and boundaries about what you are gonna spend your time on. "Oh, we've always done it this way." "Yeah, but it's not making us money." So could you just let the listeners know what kind of a journey that was for you, Kalynn? Because I think you learned a lot from that exercise, and I think that also
mhm.
helped you and Kyle gel each other even more in terms of what you both wanted and how you wanted to get there. Because
Yeah, for sure. It was really recognizing what we were all contributing towards the long-term vision moving forward. So, working with a financial planner was around looking at, like, how can we set up mom and dad, so his parents, for, retirement? What does that look like? And where's that money gonna be coming from? It's kinda like the elephant in the room, you call it the bowl, right? It's like no one really wants to talk about these things. But it really helped us increase that financial transparency piece because we weren't really sure, okay, do they have enough to retire on? Um, and we had an idea around like where our money was going to be coming from, my work as a coach, and then some form of income from town. Kyle's going to be working as a mechanic for a number of years before we can even think about getting into farming. Right, so we had an idea around, like, cash flow and that sort of thing, but when we met with a financial planner, he was able to give us some different scenarios as to, like, here's where Kyle can build equity, this is what it looks like. If the intention we had to talk about the will, what's their intention for the will? Because as we talk about in coaching, it's transferring with a warm hand, and if that's your intentions for the land, let's transfer a quarter into Kyle's name now. Like, so learning how to just be more transparent around how can we set up Kaylin and Kyle for the future? Because we've been talking about this for about 5 years, just in terms of, like, what we really want. I mean, we were raising pigs on our acreage before, and we're both really into farming. It's just a matter of, like, how that actually happens. But I think now the next step, especially with that financial planning piece, is to look at now a business plan for Kyle and I to kind of sit down and think about, okay, now we go back to revisit that financial plan and then look at also like where does the business piece fit into that? Where does business planning fit into that? Because we need to show his parents that we're also serious about how we can grow the farm.
Well,
But
and I think that business plan that you're anticipating too is another good way of building trust.
mhm,
A lot of founders listening to this podcast, Kaylin, will be thinking, well, that sounds very good, but my next generation on my farm is not willing to put anything down on paper. They just say, give it to me all now. And fear, there's lots of fear too. So I think with boundaries, um, just even on the financial piece, you and I hear often from farm families that we coach is that, you mean I have to share everything about the money? I think it, well, yeah, personally, personal side would be helpful. And also on the business side would be very helpful. But here's the boundary that you set out is this is confidential. So
mhm.
let's talk about what confidentiality looks like and what that means. Because I just see pictures in my mind of, these young women who said, Elaine, I live in the farmhouse. We moved here. We don't own it. The farm owns it. And my father-in-law just comes bursting through the door. He doesn't even knock or ring the doorbell. I was like, what? That could get pretty exciting. So, the whole boundary around what's different now that this new next generation is around and
Mm.
not assuming. How does assumption play into that, Kaylin? Because
Oh my
Dr.
gosh.
Becky, yeah, Dr. Becky talks about, boundaries can be internal boundaries, like things that you will do for yourself.
Mhm. For
But then
yourself.
talk about external boundaries, like putting things in place so that everybody knows and everybody's clear. These that are helpful and these are the things that are not helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Be authentic about being clear.
I think that also there's this kind of this story that is told to ourselves. I mean, like Kyle, my husband is like he's almost 40, like he's close to 40 now. So there's probably a story that's been told. I mean, maybe he's been telling himself, "Yeah, I'm going to take over the farm. I'm going to take over." He
Well,
was
it's
right,
all
kind of like this narrative that we've created in our minds. And now that we're here, we have 2 kids, we're older, like, we've thought a lot about this as a couple around what's gonna work for us, and we have also been, I think, making maybe some assumptions around, like, challenging some of the assumptions around what his parents want. Okay, let's go back, let's sit down and think like, we're gonna do that over the holidays for sure. I think we've all the 4 of us has all been feeling that a little bit around, like, a meeting is needed that let's look at like a refreshing conversation, right? Especially as we move into the new year, I find this time of year is just such a perfect time to be sitting down and thinking about like where do we see ourselves going, and to challenge those assumptions and check in with each other around, okay, is this what you actually want? Are you thinking about slowing down this year or next year? Because I know like his dad has talked about it, but it's like
good.
violin.
The I just a second, I have it. Here it is.
Oh yeah, there it is.
My famous sign that I keep under my desk for a very good reason because we use this
Always
always
ready.
time. By when, and especially at Valentine's, it's even a really good idea to talk about the state of your union, about your marriage or your partnership, right? And
Mm,
what do we want to focus on coming up in this next year, and how do we want to practice better self care? Which is what's very interesting to me in this podcast, Kaylin, is your framing around, what you've also learned from watching Dr. Becky's work, but just understanding that boundaries are an ultimate form of self-care. And people have no boundaries. They say, "Oh, sure, oh, sure, oh, sure." And I remember this book. It's called Everybody's Breaking Pieces Off of Me. I have no idea where this book is now, but it's the fact that where people keep pouring themselves out and giving them, giving, giving, and then you mentioned the concept of the well before. Their well is absolutely dry, right?
yeah.
And so we really also as coaches want to stress better mental wellness in farm families, and boundaries I think are a great piece of being well. No,
Mhm,
can't do that at this time. I wish I could. Have you tried asking someone else, or can it wait? Or is there
mhm.
a way to conquer this problem or this
I
challenge?
I think what's so fascinating about Dr. Becky's work too is that she talks about how safe people feel in relationships, like, not only children, but, like, just that feeling of safety because boundaries are set.
Yeah.
Because when we set out, this is what works for me, this is what doesn't work for me, and by taking care of ourselves and by being more healthy beings that can live on the farm, then we actually all feel safer in relationships. We not only feel more authentically ourselves, we just feel safer and healthier, and it's really interesting to kind of apply what we learn, and I work with our 4-year-old all the time. I'm constantly trying to put that into practice around, like, grounding myself, not yelling. It's like, okay, just staying calm around, and I use one example around, like, she puts we just had we're going into Christmas now, but by the time people listen to this, it's gonna be like the Christmas rush will be over and all that candy is just, like, all over the place and all over the house, and, she's
Oh, but Valentine's has candy too.
there we go. So candy just goes year round, right? So kids are constantly testing us with candy especially. It's kinda like, "Hey, mom, I'm gonna put this in," I'm gonna, am I gonna do it? I'm gonna put the candy in my mouth, and I can easily just, like, lash out and yell at her and be like, "No, don't put the candy in your mouth." Or I can just say, like, super calm, "I'm gonna take the candy away. It's supper." And just practicing how to stay calm, because, like, we're not having candy right now. It's supper time. How can we
Or
practice that that, calmness, which is like emotional regulation essentially with especially with kids who just trigger us. But how can we practice that with our own relationships with each other on the farm, right?
well, I have a great yeah, I'm not gonna yell at you. I'm not and I think the is disrespect, right? Yeah, yeah, conversation is not helping you.
Mhm. Like, can you imagine if people were to just regulate themselves just on their own and stay so firm in what's important to them and firm in their own boundaries and feeling that authenticity? Like, wouldn't that be just incredible?
Well, that would be great. Well, it's been good to hear your story and have an update. And I'm hearing a bit of an echo here now. Don't know what's going on with them. So we will ask our listeners to share the podcast, and you can go to drbecky.com if you want to learn more about what Kalyn's been sharing for her learnings from drbecky.com. And also would love to hear where you're listening to this podcast. And I know there's a woman in BC who uses the podcast to go running. And sounds like a great idea that you can take us along in the tractor too, or next long road trip you have. So thanks, Kalynn, for your time with us today. And if you want to know more about our work, just go to farmfamilycoach.com and we'll see you next time. Have a great Valentine's and remember to cherish your marriage and have each other's back. Bye for now.